Last time Molly had.
Grandchildren get home.
It's 11 o'clock, so I am going to call, hey Daniel, I am
Good
going
morning.
to call this meeting of the Ad Hoc Results Committee to order. It's the July 7th meeting. It is being conducted by remote video conferencing, and we are being live streamed by the county channel. So at this time, I invite everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion to approve today's agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. So that's 3-0. Okay. Robin, are there any public comments?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the committee meeting minutes. I guess we'll take them separately. The May 5th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the committee meeting minutes of May 5th, 2021.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. That's 3-0. Next are the June 2nd meeting minutes.
I move that we approve the committee meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2021.
Second.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, super. So that brings us down to today's business. We left our last meeting, the June 2nd meeting, with homework. We had agreed at that time that we were going to add a statement to each of the professional indicators, the governance and board relations, community relations, staff relations, business and finance, and instructional leadership. And we were going to add a category, pandemic related. So under governance and board relations, it would be A7.
A6.
Is it A6?
A6.
Well, on A, board governance, it says we have an A6, which is board development. Isn't that an A6? On my printed copy, A1 was policy involvement.
Mm-hmm.
Then
A2
was goal development.
yeah,
A3 is information.
yeah,
A4 is materials and background.
yeah,
A5 is board questions.
yeah.
And A6 was board development.
Okay, I must have. All right. So So I don't have questions in for. So we're using the 2020, 2021.
Yeah, I don't think that we took that off. I mean, we didn't
Right.
really touch any of the rubric when we made changes.
All right, so let me figure out which copy that I grabbed then when I did it.
Yeah, I don't have any copy that doesn't have an A6 on it.
Okay. Frank Rodriguez. So I don't have that because the copy that I have for the Frank Rodriguez, the draft only goes up to A5.
I wonder it was cut off then. We can deal with that later.
Okay. All right.
We'll have to look at the form,
Okay.
his actual evaluation, but every form I have has an A6 on it. So I don't know.
Okay. All right. We'll deal with that.
Okay. So let's just call it A7. You
Okay.
called it A6, but that's okay. Let's change that.
I'll change it to A7. Okay.
And pandemic response is
Okay.
what would be the
Mhm.
title. And then our job was to come up with
Questions?
statements that would fall into the ineffective, minimally effective, effective, and highly effective range. So, at this point, I think it would be, good for people to share what they have come up with. So Daniel, did you come up with some wording under these?
I did not touch board governance because I thought that was more of a you guys kind of
Okay,
relationship with the superintendent.
okay. Ingrid, what about you, Earl? Did you come up with some statements for there?
No, I did not.
Okay. Ingrid and I both did this. Ingrid's are much more substantial than what I came up with. And Ingrid, would you like to share yours and then we can?
Yeah, do you mind if I screen share?
Yeah,
Because I'm a
screen
visual
share.
person.
Yep, that would be great.
Can I screen share, Robin?
Hold on. Let me stop. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Now I haven't done this on this iPad before.
And David's hands up, Kathy, just so
Yes,
you know.
David.
Thanks.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I would just make a possible suggestion. You change it from pandemic response to like an environmental crisis response or something like that, so that it could be used for more than just the pandemic. Like if we had hurricanes and stuff like that, it could fit in this category.
Okay.
And it'd be more usable in the future if you change that title, I think.
I think that sounds reasonable to me. We were focused on
I know.
trying to give Dr. Rodriguez some credit for what he did well handling the pandemic. Can you see
my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with what David's saying in principle, but I think what our thoughts were when we were doing this was to make this like a one-off, like an exceptional year. But I'm it's open for discussion. But I don't know if we're going to keep it in there. I actually had it down as COVID response, so I was even more specific.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. We were thinking that this was an addition for 1 year, but if we made it more encompassing, more general in the terminology, it could be used when other events arose.
Yeah.
So,
Shouldn't we take out COVID and put in what David said?
well, that's what we're discussing. So David, what did you call it? An environmental,
Crisis or, yeah.
yeah. Because someone could argue the pandemic wasn't environmental, but
I would actually take, I don't really care that much. Like, I'm open to the will of the committee here. But one thing is, like, on mine, I mean, there's some pretty specific things, like how we used additional federal funding,
Right.
how we, coordinated with public health response. So personally, if I was voting, I would vote to keep it as kind of a one-off and limit it to pandemic response. But it's not a hill I'm going to die on.
right. And see, that's where your responses were much more specific in types of those things. Mine were more general in the flow of the previous statements. So let's take a look at Ingrid's statements and then have, follow up with this, what we want to call it. So Ingrid, you want to lead us through this?
Yeah. Okay. So the general idea was that basically ineffective's easy, right? Sort of, you didn't do anything. Minimally effective, I just used basically, which I think a lot of superintendents did throughout the country, was just sort of rely on what the state was coming down from state officials without really any other additional effort. Then I thought that effective was showing that you incorporated what was going on at the state level with some, other aspects of governance specific to the district, and that you were, good communication, good feedback, good inclusion of other entities. And then highly effective, I think, really came down to making sure all stakeholders were engaged and invested, that there was a lot of collaboration, that there was consensus, that, that there was good communication. And so I just basically took that sort of framework to each of these categories. And there are a couple things, and my computer's not coming on, which is alarming me, but because I had highlighted a couple, it didn't come through on what I sent to you, Kathy, a couple statements where the sentence, I liked the idea, but I thought the sentence was very awkward. So you'll probably catch them as we go through.
In the first one, you wrote, what was highlighted was decisions guided by student and family needs as assessed on an ongoing basis.
Right. Yeah. And I like the idea that, an effective superintendent in the pandemic, had a lens of sort of what's best for the student and the community as you're trying to, juggle all these different competing interests. But I thought that was I didn't like the way that sentence worked. So I think it needs some additional stuff.
David, now that you see these statements, what is your feeling?
My feeling doesn't change. I mean, I understand the target. I'm just uncomfortable with doing a retroactive evaluation.
Right. I understand that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just uncomfortable with it.
That's why I tried to keep it to I tried to take what we actually did out and just look at like a general framework of what would constitute effective pandemic response, highly effective, et cetera, and just sort of put what I thought. There is a little bit of consistency through these different, and I did talk to Dick Geyer about the finance piece, because I felt like I couldn't really assess that. And I thought on instructional leadership that there were people who had a much better handle on that than I did. So, but the general idea, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And so mine, which I didn't type up to share, mine is much more general. It kind of aligns with the other statements. And that, so David, let me read mine and see if you still have the same concern about being a retroactive type thing. So I wrote under ineffective, doesn't inform the board of, really an ineffective, when it came down to the pandemic, doesn't inform board of decision-making process. Minimally effective. When prompted, supplies process and data to the board. Effective provides all board members with information regarding board functions, and because this was governance and board relations, regarding board functions and I can't read my own writing here, regarding board functions and data leading to decisions. And then under highly effective, I use the actively communicated with the board regarding decision-making processes related to the pandemic. So they're a little more general. I don't know. Does that help? Does that make it less reactive?
For me, yeah. That's much more in line with what I'm thinking to make this reusable. Because if it's a one-off and there's something wrong with the tool, that that it doesn't account for these kinds of things. So I think Ingrid's things are great. I'm very specific to the COVID. I like yours because they're more general, and that would be my inclination, to go to the more general thing, so that if we have something else that's a crisis next year, we can still use the same criteria. Maybe it's a hurricane or something else, but the same criteria would apply. And I always tend to want to go that way.
Well, and I hadn't really thought about that, and I think you may be right in many sense. But my thing though is, I think for me personally, when I'm looking at this, is that this pandemic has had and will continue to have such an exceptional impact on education that I don't think it's comparable to a hurricane. So I think you got to decide which way we're going to go. Like, we do something that's pandemic specific, that really, because there were state mandates, mask mandates, vaccines, there were accommodations for teachers. It lasted for the entire year. It's still being felt, the virtual school, things that we have never had to deal with before. And I don't know if, like a hurricane, or I'm trying to think of a war, I don't know what other kind of calamitous events might occur, civil unrest, something would have the same impact. And specifically, we talked about at other results committee meetings about the leadership triangle, right? High expectations, culture of accountability, and use of data, the smart use of data. Those are really different when you apply that to a pandemic, and you've got to coordinate with public health and all these other things, than a hurricane. So it would surprise me a little bit, although it's interesting, because I do think we need to take the lessons we've learned from the pandemic and apply it to a major disruption like a hurricane. But man, it just seems like, oh, I'm getting feedback, that this was an exceptional event.
But I think what David is not on this hurricane. We have snow days sometimes. What happens if we get a really bad snowstorm? We have had it in the past.
We are having some feedback. So maybe I see both sides, and so we could add an A7 and an A7A, one totally specific to the pandemic and one that's more general that we reuse, and just know that 7A is going to go away after this, or make it, instead of adding it to the end of the board to each of these things, make it a category F and call it pandemic response, and then have a line for governance and board relations, community relations, staff relations, business and finance, and instructional leadership.
Well, so one question I have, and is, I would have thought that this instrument would have already had something in it that would capture a response to like a snow day or a hurricane or sort of the things that we already deal with on a pretty regular basis. Are those things not already in this tool
Well,
somehow?
I think you could certainly say that they are in terms of information. Okay, there's one under A3, it says information. And that information is pretty broad, right? So it could be, does not provide the information, the board needs to perform its responsibilities.
Because we do have an OE for, I think it's 17.9 off the top of my head, I'd have to double check, about disaster response. And it's actually something I wanted the board to discuss, prior to the next school year, because there's a lot of parents that have the expectation that if we have a hurricane, and we're out of school for several days, that we'll just shift over to virtual school, which I don't think is what the district is necessarily planning. But I think that we already have a policy on developing a disaster response, so it could go under policy involvement too.
Right, I guess.
We don't have a policy for, social distancing and hybrid learning.
Right. So, David, your eyes on this are important because you were on the committee that developed this, and it took us a long time to get to where we are with adding these, and our idea was that it was a one-off, as Ingrid said, that we recognized that this was something that hopefully isn't going to happen again in a lifetime, and we needed some way to try and measure our response, the effectiveness of the response to it. So, but I certainly see your point. So, committee, we're going to have to decide how we keep going. I suggest at this time that we go on to community relations. So right now, under board governance and board relations, we have general statements and we have specific statements. The specific statements are almost what Dr. Rodriguez would use as his documentation for some of the things that he did. But that was just my thought. I thought that they hit on things that they were just much more specific than I came up with. So
William's hands up.
William?
My logical thinking was that just to go back to what you were talking about, I was thinking that every situation may call for different things, because certain situations may be more serious than others and maybe longer than others, and the time may last longer than others. So I think that is a situational situation. It is a situation to situation thing that may occur, and I think that every situation it will bring different circumstances and different things that need to be done. So, I mean, I don't think there's a one size to fit all here. That's basically what I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other comments about this? Mr. Fallon, what are your thoughts? You were with us when we worked through this instrument, and I know you said you didn't tackle anything with the board relations, but what are your thoughts?
So my thoughts from hearing everyone share land somewhere in the middle. I do believe it needs to be somewhat specific to this event, but also keeping the generic measuring in the rubric.
Yeah, that's,
So like,
and
if I tackled the board governance, I said, for ineffective would have been something like no level of communication regarding appropriate plan of action. So that does nothing to do with the pandemic. It could apply to God forbid we're on a fault line, an earthquake that hasn't happened in hundreds of years. So that could happen. Shares plan when prompted. I liked that coming from you to that level. Flesh that out a little bit more. Actively communicates the plan would be effective. And then highly effective would be consistently communicates details of the plan and pending changes. So we're keeping it very generic, but at any point in time can be applied to any situation that might be above and beyond what a normal year is.
yeah, I think that's what I will say is that was what I tried to do was come up with essentially a generic rubric on what would constitute in general, doing nothing, doing just what's the state, requires, et cetera. And then apply that to those different things. The problem I think that we have to look at with this pandemic is we should already have in this tool and in our OEs things that we can anticipate, like hurricanes or snow days or other interruptions that are, short term and have happened before. To me, the problem with this pandemic was, you saw such a varied response across the whole country, right? And so how do you capture what you wanted or what you saw as leadership in this time? Because there was no good model going forward. And it had such a long-ranging impact. I mean, people are talking about it having generational impact on education. So I don't know if lumping it in with snow days and hurricanes will adequately capture it, because the other piece of this is we were doing this in lieu of holding the district accountable for academic achievements and teacher retention, because as we've heard, we have unprecedented academic learning loss and unprecedented teacher turnover. So that was the thought was, okay, we'll get rid of those metrics, but let's put something in the rubric that captures what we did do during this unprecedented time. So I have to say, I would push back on, I do think that Mr. Strippinger's point is completely valid, that we don't want to do retroactive evaluations because that gets to be dicey. So I think we need to make sure that whatever we put out is objective. But I do think it should be specific to, a worldwide pandemic that basically shut down education for a year.
Anyone else have any comments at this point?
I would say that as far as the nation, every school district did not react the same way we did. And we should not tie ourselves down to that. And I don't want to see us get an instrument that we have a lot of stuff on here and like we had before, So that's just I think we should talk about things that is going to benefit us and benefit our students and the community. Because you have many districts, they didn't do any virtual, they did face-to-face, So that's just my take on it.
Right. And as we move through the list, we have added those components to it. So let's kind of go through the our list, and then we can see where that takes us as we go through. So the next one was community relations, and Ingrid came up. Well, mine were more generic, and I will read mine, and then Ingrid can go over hers. So it was B7, and ineffective, does not communicate pandemic response to the public. Minimally effective, inconsistently communicates pandemic response to the community. Effective, consistently informs community of pandemic protocols and changes. And highly effective was regularly and consistently informs community of pandemic response and data used to support response. Now, if we could take out the word pandemic if we wanted to. Consistently, regularly and consistently informs community of response of, we'd have to, and data used to support the response.
Mine were very similar to that.
Yeah.
Except for in the the effective, I actually had to capture something to the level of with sufficient lead time or notification. So it went above and beyond just a communication, but also gave enough of a heads up to the stakeholders that they could plan appropriately to the plan.
Yeah.
It wasn't on Monday we're going back face to face. It's in February we're going back face to face.
Yeah.
So I just captured that essence of time on that one.
And David, Daniel, what did you have for the wording? What wording did you use for the highly effective?
I said communicated changes with evidence of stakeholder feedback, and then I had like something scribbled with appropriate level of notification. It could be with a sufficient. I wanted to get to some level of sufficiency or appropriate for not only because I had more of with effective, communication existed.
Right.
And it had input of stakeholders, whereas it's not just here's our communication. So it had evidence of actually the stakeholders in the community, and then the added to the next level had the actual appropriate lead time where everything seemed very methodical and planned and not reactive to, which is getting to that level of the next level of efficiency. And then, of course, minimally effective is, I think, the same thing you had. Like no documentation of communication or gathering input from stakeholders.
Yeah. Ingrid?
Yeah.
You want to share put your screen back up?
Well, do you want me to, I can just kind of give you a quick run through. So yeah, mine are very specific because to me, community relations is more than just what Dr. Rodriguez is informing the community of. It's not just communications. It's also sort of what do we do with the information? I think how were stakeholders engaged? How is it updated? It was a very rapidly changing situation. So mine was did not accept input from health officials, which a lot of districts didn't do. Did not engage parents, students, or community members in school opening decisions. And then this one I would change, but did not provide regular status updates. And what I meant was where, any parent could figure out or any community member could figure out what was going on with the schools. So I said through a public COVID dashboard, which most districts did. So, but, was there some instrument where people could easily find out what was happening? Minimally effective, routinely informed community of changes in school policy as determined by the State Department of Education and their implications for Beaufort County schools. So that goes back to the idea that the minimally effective thing would just be to do what the state told you to, with fidelity, I guess. Effective was use State Department of Education in conjunction with community feedback to guide decision making. Keeps community informed of COVID status in the schools through transparent and dynamic communication tools such as emails, alerts, and a COVID dashboard on the website. Highly effective, I had all stakeholders were given avenues of discussion for ongoing changes to COVID policies. Decisions were supported by multiple inputs, including health officials, government standards, and community feedback. Concerns were addressed in a timely and empathetic response. Community was kept informed of changes through multiple tools. All groups were given a voice in the process. So that's sort of a laundry list, but again, the implication was if you're highly effective, then you're taking all these inputs, you're using that to make decisions, you're communicating the decisions, and even when people disagree with the decisions, that they're given avenues for feedback and that they, have so they feel engaged. So that was kind of, again, the rubric of the overall rubric, but it's a lot. It can definitely be trimmed down.
Yeah.
And that's all I have on community relations.
Yeah. And I think with adding all these specifics in there, it helps Dr. Rodriguez. It kind of is giving the framework for the response.
Yeah.
For, because when Dr. Rodriguez, when he gets this, he does a self-evaluation, and then he puts a document forward with evidence as to why he gives him that mark. And a lot of these things in here would be indications of evidence.
Right.
So going
Yeah,
back
when I
to,
did it, I was just trying to think of things that I thought were important
Right.
to do. And I looked at like what other districts were doing to think of, what other, but it's kind of a laundry list going along the lines of
Right.
the overall theme.
right. Okay. So then on to staff relations. Daniel, you want to go first with this one?
Yeah, so I guised this one around, and it might have been coming out the wrong way, with more of a staff safety, which I think
Okay.
could blend to kind of the not just pandemic response, but any type of disaster response. So ineffective is always pretty easy. No level of concern for staff safety when developing current operating plan. Then we get into minimally effective. Level of concern of staff members present or accounted for in the plan. The effective is getting into not only having concern of staff members, but also getting feedback from staff members that might have special circumstances. And then the highly effective is having a tool or a procedure in place for not only knowing, but gathering all potential health concerns and making the best plan of action from that. So not coming to the table with the plan, but gathering the information and having the plan that will account for staff safety.
Okay. And I had something for the ineffective. I had doesn't respond to staff fears, concerns. Minimally affected, I had inconsistent response to staff concerns, and inconsistent response and communication to staff concerns. Under effective, consistently responds to staff concerns, reevaluates data and plans in response to the concerns. And then the highly effective, I had proactively works to support staff and improve working conditions. So you had that information in there about gathering a tool, coming up with a tool to gather information, which I think is appropriate. And Ingrid, you had.
Want me to read it?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, hold on. All right, staff relations. Did not listen to staff concerns, did not allow reasonable accommodations consistent with most current guidance from health officials, did not communicate plans and expectations to staff. Minimally effective. Staff were informed of decisions regarding COVID policies in a timely manner. See, it's a one-way thing, right? Effective. Staff were provided multiple avenues for feedback. Staff were engaged in COVID decisions. Decisions and changes were communicated to staff in a timely manner. And then highly effective, and full disclosure, this is where I do think I had some bias, because one of the things I did think that was a leadership thing was, when staff did have concerns about going back to the classroom and people were upset about it, that there was a lot of outreach, like the mental health. And I know Dr. Rodriguez went like to individual teachers and met with them and, that kind of thing. So I said highly effective was Staff felt supported throughout the process of COVID decision-making. Staff well-being was a priority throughout COVID with additional resources, a holistic response, and transparency.
Yeah.
End of staff relations.
Yeah, and this one I think is,
But this is an example where I think it's hard to come up with something super general, right? Because
Right.
hurricane, we didn't have like a mental health outreach program for hurricanes, or, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like it's something where it was very unique.
And
yeah,
I think we've gotten lucky for the last, well, I mean, I'm not lucky because we've been hit with a hurricane pretty much every year for, I think, 6 years. But we haven't had that category 3 come right through Beaufort, which could spawn the need for some mental health or some, the district reaching out and connecting its staff members with, the appropriate agencies for assistance. There's a chance that, if a category 3, 4, 5 hurricane hits Beaufort, it could be very COVID-like here for a while. So we've gotten lucky with, being out. I think the most we were out was, 9 or 10 days with the hurricane. But I mean, it could get to a point where there's actual mass devastation of property and loss of life that could require these same types of interactions.
yeah.
Earl's hands up.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes, some of this discussion I'm hearing, should we look at our disaster plan and then come back to this?
Yeah, I don't know if it got put on the agenda, but it's on the list of things I think we should look at. It's on the agenda request list.
You mean for the disaster plan's a policy, right?
The policy is that they are to present the board with a disaster plan and business continuity.
Okay, so, I don't know if we, at this point, our job is to come up with, to amend the document that we have to evaluate the superintendent. That's our task, to
Right.
amend the document. So, getting off on the disaster plan, an amendment of the document, I mean, if we're going to do that, we could ask the superintendent to develop an individual development plan and ask him to address something. I don't know. I'm just throwing that off the top of my head, but.
Well, I think the reason that Mr. Campbell brings it up in the context of this discussion is we keep talking about adding these sections as if we're talking about a very general disaster relief response. And so I having heard now both yours, Daniel's, and mine's too specific. And basically what I did is I sent that to you as a rough draft to start tooling it down. I think somewhere between yours and mine, and and I'm gonna, is the right way to do it. I do think this should be a one-off pandemic response because we are specifically taking out the academic metrics and the teacher retention metrics, but we intend to put those back in. So I don't think we need to go, if we want to go full on where we're adjusting this instrument to capture disaster planning and business continuity, then I think we should first hear what our business continuity and disaster plan is, like to Mr. Campbell's point. I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to focus, in my opinion, and I could make a motion, but I think we should, my recommendation is that we develop this addition to the current tool as a one-time adjustment in lieu of our academic metrics and our teacher retention metrics. And then, and just have it, and then we can work our two instruments, the two, your version, my version, Daniel's version, and get them a little bit closer. That would be my recommendation. Or I can make a motion and we can vote on it. I don't know.
Well, I that's where we kind of
Right.
That's what we had decided at our last meeting, that we were going to do, this was going to be a thing. So I don't know if it needs a motion, but when we take it to the board, we can say, this is what we're proposing, this was our thinking, and then, then others, and perhaps there are others that think it, in addition to David, and we're going to make it a little less specific.
Yeah, bring them all together. But I think that fundamentally we need to decide if we're going to make this a general disaster response metric. And if we are, then I think Mr. Campbell's right. We need to see what we have already. But my recommendation would be, let's not do that. Let's stick to what we kind of talked about, is making this a 1-year thing, and then being very conscious of Mr. Stribinger's point that we don't make this. And I will admit, like on the staff relations, I do feel like we did a really good job, like above and beyond. I would mark us as highly effective on that. So that did factor in when I'm making my list. I wanted to include, that there was a lot of outreach, mental health, additional resources, et cetera. So walking that back and saying, let's make this more general and less, to your point, like, where we're already giving people the evidence that we have. I think that's totally valid. And I think we can do that. Make it less specific.
Yeah. So, I don't know, is a motion necessary for us to proceed? Mr. Campbell, what do you think?
No, I don't think we need a motion.
Yeah, I feel like that what Ingrid just stated is where the conclusion that we had come to before. So now what I'm hearing is we are going to, when we present it to the board, we'll still title it as a one-off pandemic response, and we'll pare down these rubric measurements so that they're not quite as specific as what.
Not so leading, I guess.
Yeah, not so leading is the thing.
And I did not really think about that as well as I should have but like I said, I was just making a laundry list of things I thought you could look at for somebody.
So David, give me your input on that. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll support whatever the committee decides. Now I'm just really uncomfortable, as I've said before, doing a retroactive and molding the tool to get the result that we think is appropriate.
Right.
That is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So I'm real uncomfortable with it. I think he's done a hell of a job. I don't think we could have a better superintendent, but I don't want to embed that in the tool.
Right.
Right. And to your point, I can see where I did that unintentionally, and in certain senses, almost intentionally, which wasn't really my aim, but I think that's a very valid point. So we just need to kind of clean it all up.
Yeah. So David, do you feel that if we went with the more general statements that Daniel and I have crafted, but we still labeled it pandemic response because that's what we're trying to measure, does that, what do you think of that?
Sure, as long as we explain when you present it to the board, that this is a one-time deal, that this is not what the tool is going to look like going forward. And then y'all are going to have to work on the tool going forward, because that time's running out on getting next year's evaluation worked out. But yeah, as long as it's explained that this is unique,
Yeah.
That's good. But I do think the response is more generic would be helpful. And I do think that the fact that we have to add this shows there was a weakness in the tool that you can fix.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then I also do agree that before we add something more general, that we do need to know what our policy is for the disaster plan or whatever, as stated by by Earl and Ingrid. I cannot see, is William's hand up?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, so then moving on to business and finance. Now this one I did have, I was more specific in mine with the pandemic. So someone's gonna, help me out here. I had, for ineffective, I had inconsistent allocation of PPE and financial government accessing governmental money. And then under minimally effective, I had resources are allocated to meet immediate needs and purchased with available funding. Under effective, I had resources are resupplied proactively and meets ESSER funding guidelines. Now, see, that's really specific to the pandemic. And then under highly effective, uses state and federal resources to maximum benefit. So I really need help on that one. Daniel, what did you come up with?
So I went more along the lines of procurement for the first. So
Okay.
I said no evidence of procuring needed materials through use of emergency funding. So I didn't necessarily name ESSER because I kind of tried to make it a little as generic as possible. But after hearing Mr. Campbell, I really went to the facilities management bullet, the D4, because those are almost perfect for the situation if we were going to cite back to that disaster recovery plan.
Yeah.
So there's no plan, there is a plan, the plan's actively followed. So once that conversation started, I really kind of honed in on that, trying to capture the essence of that D4 with the plan. So if we could mimic something like that, I think it would be easily applied across any type of disruption.
Yeah. Ingrid, comments?
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you. I talked to Dick Geyer about this one. And he basically, again, kind of with what I was talking about, the bigger framework, he said that effective would be we balance the budget. And that highly effective would, obviously ineffective means you didn't have any plan. And then he thought highly effective was, collaboration, stakeholders, getting input from principals about how to spend this money, et cetera, et cetera. So the word I came up with for highly effective from him was a more collaborative response. And effective would be essentially balancing the budget. So that was kind of the feedback I got from our finance chair, which I think kind of lines up with what you guys are talking about. Although I think that D4 is, it's reasonable because so much of this is facility, but we also have to look at, how we're doing the learning loss and all the different sort of softer expenses that we have from this pandemic too.
Yeah. This one almost, to my mind, if you just took the D1, if you took all of the items on it and just applied it this year through the lens of the pandemic, you might not need to add a specific pandemic response, an additional one. I don't know.
The only thing I think that, is that how we handled just an onslaught of federal funding.
Yeah.
A windfall, as it were.
Yeah, the word I used in highly effective was cohesive. So it was like a cohesive plan. You use collaborate, but it was really an all-encompassing plan to deal with the PPE all the way to the additional resources needed for the learning loss.
Yeah, the theme for me with highly effective is, did we manage to achieve consensus in this highly, discordant period?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then let's go on to instructional leadership. And I had in my notes that we had agreed to add two, that we had talked about adding two. One, the pandemic response to learning loss, and the other, the pandemic response to instructional delivery.
Oh, I had learning loss and return to face-to-face.
Face. Instructional deliveries returning face-to-face.
Okay.
What do the rest of you think? Do we need to have two specific things? I think if we look under instructional leadership, we have support for students, we have instruction, curriculum, staff development. Certainly all of those things were impacted during the pandemic, right? Staff development had to be heightened to get the staff up to get their ability to use the virtual things up. So each one of those could be looked at through through the lens this year of additional things that had to happen. But two things that didn't have to happen that are specific to this year are the learning loss and the instructional delivery model, in my mind, but that's just me. So other comments? Do we need one or two? Earl, what do you think?
I don't think we can actually address the learning loss until, we can address it, but to find out how it affects our students until they get back into school.
Right, and what I had, we won't have any data. No. We have the data. All data is still embargoed. We have the MAP data from spring to this year's MAP data, which is not encouraging at all, to say the least. So in terms of pandemic response to learning loss, well, I'll just share what I came up with for under ineffective. No optional programs were developed. For minimally effective, I put minimal effort to, I put some additional programs are developed with minimal effort to ensure participation. Under effective, I put develops multiple programs to address learning loss and to ensure participation by targeted students, participation of targeted students. And then for highly effective, I put develops multiple programs to ensure participation by all targeted students and encourages participation by all students. My thought on this is that the targeted students are the ones who lost the most, but we have a whole lot of students who weren't included with some of these targeted programs because they didn't lose as much as others, if that makes any sense. So those were my thoughts under the pandemic response to learning loss. What did the district do? What did we put in place to kind of mitigate the learning loss at this point? Daniel, what did you come up with for that one?
I actually didn't touch this one
Okay,
because I think we're still in the downward slide of the learning loss.
okay,
Not saying that we didn't do anything. We had the 2.0 program. We had a full pilot of iReady. We did a lot of these things that you mentioned with programs and plans of action, but that was to lessen the amount of loss that was and is still occurring, because honestly, we still had a pretty significant amount of students that were still virtual all year round, even though we did come back face to face, even though everything was followed and we did the best we could. I'm not sure that we've got a true handle on what the learning loss was yet. So I didn't touch this one because I almost see this one as a 21-22. What did you do to address the learning loss?
okay.
Now that the schools are back open, what did you do? So that's where I got a little torn on that one, because I'm not sure that we've hit the bottom of learning loss to be able to measure effectively. If, on a self-evaluation, and someone were to come back, a superintendent came back and said, I did X, Y, and Z, and I do feel that I am highly effective. But then, fall map comes around and you see a little different image, because it's still occurring. Because now that we've got the kids back in the building, now he can build them up and try to fix that loss.
Okay. Ingrid, comment?
Yeah, I was hoping that I left my instructional part open because I felt like maybe there were other people that could put better words to it than I could. I think this is really, to me, the trickiest as far as leadership, because it's just so all this stuff is so up in the air, and the metrics are so all over the place, and it's such an exceptional event. So I think what you have, Kathy, works for me. To be honest, as far as like breaking into two categories, I say we don't. I see why we do it, but I feel like at this point, like there's a big debate going on between how general and how specific. And so maybe to back out some of the specificity a little bit and just make it more broad, because it is such a complex aspect of this pandemic.
Yeah. And, Earl?
I don't have anything to add to that. I think what Ingrid just said, I think I agree with that.
Okay. And remember when we talked about this before, this is, what processes, it's really a process thing. What processes are being put in place to address learning loss? The response is the key word here. What's being done. And remember, this evaluation goes from, this instrument is used in October. So what has been done to address potential learning loss or to that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because we're like to Daniel's point, we're sort of in we're still in the middle of the storm on this one, and to kind of try and step back and see how we're doing. Let's get out of the storm first.
Yeah. But, I guess my viewpoint is we didn't just sit by and let the flood come.
Right.
We recognized
lifeboats.
Yeah, we recognized that the flood was coming, right? So at my house, when there's
we had the Weather Channel on.
I go down to the basement and I pick everything up so it doesn't, because I learned that from my first experience. So
you check your documents, you make sure you got your flood insurance.
So even, so there was some response to learning loss, right? And it was.
It's just,
what-
what your point is, though, the analogy works really well, because I think what's really tricky about this part is, what was the process? But then we're saying, now we're looking back, did the process work?
Right. And
The water's
that's,
still rising, I don't know.
yeah, and to Daniel's point, that's on next year's evaluation.
Yeah.
Did the process work?
So my vote would be to keep it fairly general and just try to capture that we were proactive and
Yeah.
responsive, and and did what needed to be done to a certain level. I think that's my take on it. That's about the best we can do at this point. That's why I kind of left it blank. I tried to dodge that question a little bit.
All right, so were you okay with the kind of general statements I came up with?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
So do we have a E11 and E12, or we're not doing that?
no, we're just doing E11,
Okay.
pandemic response to learning loss, right? Unless we want, do we want to read pandemic response to anticipated learning loss? To
stave off learning loss, to
Loss.
minimize learning loss, to
address learning loss?
reduce, ameliorate learning loss.
Yeah,
And somewhat to Mr. Stripper's point is, if we put in learning loss, we're almost writing the evaluation after the
Right.
fact, because now we
Yeah.
know learning loss occurred. What did we do to fix it? We have to think of something, pandemic response to impact on learning. So we're not assuming there's a loss. We know now there was a loss,
yeah,
but we need to make it somewhat
yeah,
more open.
yeah. Pandemic response to impact on learning works, or pandemic response to instruction?
I don't know. To me, it seems like to try to maintain the integrity of instruction, or maintain, in the face
Yeah.
of all this
Right.
adversity. What did we do to kind of keep learning going?
Right.
Yeah. I feel
Pandemic,
like there's a word out there.
yeah, pandemic response to learning, just pandemic response to learning.
Student achievement. I think learning's better.
Daniel, you're shaking your head. Can you think of anything else? I mean,
That was a shaking yes, not a shaking no.
Okay.
This is a tough one.
Yeah.
To look at objectively where we sit now to where we were, because his evaluation runs October to October, I think, or
Right.
September to October
Yeah.
to September. If you put yourself in that calendar, where were we? This wasn't really happening. So I think our pandemic response to learning is probably the best we're going to get if we try to wordsmith this too much.
Yeah, or just student learning, if we add the word student in there. Pandemic response to student
What
learning.
about teaching and learning?
Now we're back
Yeah.
to instruction.
Yeah, because it's instructional
'Cause
leadership.
Exactly. So I'd say teaching and learning,
Yeah,
and just leave it at that.
okay. Okay, so how about I try and go through all of these things again and send out to all of you my take on our discussion. We're going from specific to a little to more general, and you guys can, the committee members can look at it and tell me, do I have the words right here? Make suggestions.
Do you want some help with that, Kathy? Like, do you want to break it up where I could take one or two sections, Earl could take a section, or would you rather do it all from one place?
Well, you know what, it might be more consistent if we did it from one place, I think.
I just wanted to offer,
Yeah.
that's a big job.
Well, but I think that, a lot of it's been done. I have, Daniel, if you have yours in writing, if you have it written down, could you just shoot that to me? And then I'll have yours, I'll have mine, I have Ingrid's.
Sense of it.
Okay. And then I will, send something out because we've got to get this to the board.
Yeah.
We've got to get it to the board for approval so that, Dr. Rodriguez knows what he's being evaluated on. Because the evaluation's in October,
So is this going to come up to the board then for July 13th meeting?
Robin's shaking her head.
I mean, it can if you have it ready. That's putting it in board docs tomorrow and talking about it on Tuesday. So
No.
I don't think so.
No, so it'll have to be the first week. We got to get it on the calendar for the first week in August. The first one in August, okay? David, while you stepped out, in our discussion on under the instructional leadership, or whatever that title is now, yeah, instructional leadership, we added the pandemic response to we're calling it pandemic response to teaching and learning. And had pretty, not pretty general statements about what's ineffective, minimally effective, effective, highly effective, and what we're measuring here, what we're trying to measure here is process. Were steps taken to address teaching and learning in any different manner because of the pandemic? We decided to stay away from the word learning loss because, to your point, we are predicting something. The whole country knows there's been a learning loss, but and we felt like the addressing learning loss would come up in next year's evaluation when we get back to the academic metrics, right? So do you have any, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree completely, and I just emphasize your point that this is about process because metrics is in a whole nother section.
Right.
So this is just the processes that we thought would yield good results. The good results are measured elsewhere. So I think that's a good emphasis point.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, so I will take these general statements, I will type them up and send them to committee, and we can, if you have any comments about wordsmithing, and if we can have another meeting, I'll get them to everyone by the end of this week. And if we can have another meeting prior to the August 3rd school board meeting, that would be great. And perhaps we need to have it like the 21st of July so that we can get things ready to be entered into board docs on, if we did it on the 21st and if we had to make anything else, we'd get it ready for board docs. Ingrid, you volunteered. Are you still there? Your face is gone. Okay. Maybe Ingrid can put together a sheet that talks about the other conclusions that we came to, that we will add to board docs, like why we can't measure student, the metrics on student data. Why we're taking that out and why we're taking out the teacher retention part. But we are keeping in the financial metrics, you know, and why we think we can keep in the financial metrics.
So do you want to meet on the 21st at 11 o'clock?
I think that would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
21st of
July.
at what time?
11.
Okay.
Can we make it a little bit later? Can we make it at like noon?
That's fine.
Okay.
Does that work for you? Ingrid, does that work for you? I think we lost her. I'll check with her. Daniel, does that work for you?
I'll make it work.
Okay. So we'll meet at noon on the 21st, and the goal of that meeting is to finalize all the wording that we will be sending out so that we'll have it ready for board docs. And I will get my attempts at incorporating everything I heard to the committee members, and I look forward to feedback, written feedback prior to our meeting on the 21st.
There's Ingrid.
Ingrid's back. So Ingrid, we decided that we are going to meet on the 21st at noon.
Okay.
So that this is the goal. I'm going to send out, I'm going to type this up, each of these statements, and send it out to the committee members and ask for written feedback so that when we meet on the 21st, we'll be able to finalize the wording of the rubric, and then we will be able to make sure that it will be in board docs with sufficient time for the August 3rd meeting.
Sounds excellent. Sorry
And
about that.
That's okay. And while you were gone, you got an assignment since you offered to help.
I did.
Yeah. So I thought it would be, in addition to this metric that we will be presenting to the board, that we should probably have some type of cover sheet about, we decided we're taking out the data metrics for student achievement and why, why we can't do that, and that we're taking out the teacher retention.
Yeah, so kind of bullet points of how we got to where we're at.
Exactly. So
Okay,
can you
I can
help
do
with
that.
that? Perfect. Okay.
I don't know how to salute that probably. That's the best I can do.
Yeah. Okay. So any other comments? Any other hands up? No? David, anything else for the good of the committee?
I'd like to say I really appreciate Mr. Stribinger coming and making the comments, because
Yes.
having worked on this instrument and he brought up points I had not thought about, and I appreciate that.
Totally agree. I told him I was happy to see him here today. Okay. At this point, I think we are ready to adjourn unless anybody else has anything additional to share.
So moved.
Okay. See you on the
Oh, wait,
21st.
Earl, do you have something?
Earl?
Huh?
No. Did
No.
you have something to say? No.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See
Thank
you
you,
at our
everyone.
next meeting on the 21st. Bye.
Everyone bye.